Chapter 1. Why Medieval Monks Slept in Shifts by Candlelight. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something deeply unthreatening, something slow, something dimly lit. Imagine a stone room, cold in a very committed way, with a candle doing its best but not really winning. Settle in, lower the lights, let your shoulders drop a little. You don't need to remember names, you don't need to follow dates. You can just float along while a group of medieval monks quietly fail at getting a full night's sleep. On purpose, because of course they did. This is a story about why medieval monks slept in shifts by candlelight. Not because it was efficient, not because it was healthy, but because medieval religious life was built around the idea that comfort was suspicious, sleep was morally questionable, and being slightly miserable at all times meant you were probably doing it right. So let's drift back to early medieval Europe, where monasteries were everywhere, stone boxes full of men who had opted out of normal life and into a strict routine of prayer, silence, fasting, and extremely inconvenient bedtime schedules. These were not casual retreats, these were total lifestyle commitments. Once you joined, your day, your night, and your spine posture all belonged to the rule. And when we say the rule, we usually mean the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century by a man who clearly did not believe in sleeping in. Benedict looked at the chaos of earlier monastic life and decided it needed structure, not fun structure, spiritual structure. The kind that tells you exactly when to wake up, exactly when to pray, exactly when to eat, and exactly when to stop talking, which for many monks was most of the day. Sleep in this system was not sacred, it was tolerated, necessary but barely. Benedict allowed for rest because monks kept collapsing otherwise, which was bad for morale and worse for chanting. But sleep was never meant to be indulgent. You were not supposed to enjoy it too much. Enjoyment was how sin snuck in. First it was comfort, then it was dreams, then next thing you know, you're thinking about cheese during prayer. So monks slept in shifts. Fragmented, broken, candlelit shifts. The night was divided by prayer hours, known as the divine office. These included matins, lauds, prime, and several others that sound peaceful until you realize they happened at times like midnight, 2 a.m., and whenever it's still dark and you're very tired. Matins was the big one, often held in the dead center of the night, sometimes around midnight, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. The exact timing depended on the season, the monastery, and how serious everyone was feeling that year. But the point was the same. You went to sleep, not deeply, not fully dressed down, and then a bell rang, loudly, and you got up. Imagine this from the monk's perspective. You lie down on a narrow bed, usually a wooden frame with straw or a thin mattress. You are fully clothed because undressing is a luxury and also cold is character building. The room is dark, not cozy dark, absolute dark. Stone walls, stone floors, and somewhere nearby a candle or oil lamp burns because complete darkness was considered spiritually risky. Too many thoughts, too many demons. Better to have a small flame watching you. You drift off. Not for long, then the bell, always the bell, a sound that cuts through sleep like a moral obligation. You sit up, your body protests, your joints creak like they've been personally offended, and you shuffle, silently, because silence is also part of the deal, toward the church. This is where the candlelight really comes in. Medieval monasteries did not have electricity, obviously, but they also didn't have a lot of candles to waste. Wax was expensive, tallow smelled terrible, light was rationed. So the church at night was dim, just enough light to see the outline of the altar, just enough to avoid tripping over a fellow monk who hasn't fully woken up yet. The monks stand. They chant, slowly, in Latin, which they may or may not fully understand, depending on education levels. The chanting is not energetic. It is not uplifting. It is steady, low, designed to be monotonous, because excitement leads to enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is basically joy, and joy is dangerously close to pleasure. So monks slept in shifts, fragmented, broken, candlelit shifts. The night was divided by prayer hours, known as the divine office. These included matins, lauds, prime, and several others that sound peaceful until you realize they happened at times like midnight, 2 a.m., and whenever it's still dark and you're very tired. Matins was the big one, often held in the dead center of the night, sometimes around midnight, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. The exact timing depended on the season, the monastery, and how serious everyone was feeling that year. But the point was the same. You went to sleep, not deeply, not fully dressed down, and then a bell rang, loudly, and you got up. Imagine this from the monk's perspective. You lie down on a narrow bed, usually a wooden frame with straw or a thin mattress. You are fully clothed because undressing is a luxury and also cold is character building. The room is dark, not cozy dark, absolute dark. Stone walls, stone floors, and somewhere nearby a candle or oil lamp burns because complete darkness was considered spiritually risky. Too many thoughts, too many demons. Better to have a small flame watching you. You drift off, not for long, then the bell, always the bell, a sound that cuts through sleep like a moral obligation. You sit up, your body protests, your joints creak like they've been personally offended, and you shuffle, silently, because silence is also part of the deal, toward the church. This is where the candlelight really comes in. Medieval monasteries did not have electricity, obviously, but they also didn't have a lot of candles to waste. Wax was expensive, tallow smelled terrible, light was rationed. So the church at night was dim, just enough light to see the outline of the altar, just enough to avoid tripping over a fellow monk who hasn't fully woken up yet. The monks stand. They chant, slowly, in Latin, which they may or may not fully understand, depending on education levels. The chanting is not energetic. It is not uplifting. It is steady, low, designed to be monotonous, because excitement leads to enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is basically joy, and joy is dangerously close to pleasure. So monks slept in shifts, fragmented, broken, candlelit shifts. The night was divided by prayer hours, known as the divine office. These included matins, lauds, prime, and several others that sound peaceful until you realize they happened at times like midnight, 2 a.m., and whenever it's still dark and you're very tired. Matins was the big one, often held in the dead center of the night, sometimes around midnight, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. The exact timing depended on the season, the monastery, and how serious everyone was feeling that year. But the point was the same. You went to sleep, not deeply, not fully dressed down, and then a bell rang, loudly, and you got up. Imagine this from the monk's perspective. You lie down on a narrow bed, usually a wooden frame with straw or a thin mattress. You are fully clothed because undressing is a luxury and also cold is character building. The room is dark, not cozy dark, absolute dark. Stone walls, stone floors, and somewhere nearby a candle or oil lamp burns because complete darkness was considered spiritually risky. Too many thoughts, too many demons. Better to have a small flame watching you. You drift off, not for long, then the bell, always the bell, a sound that cuts through sleep like a moral obligation. You sit up, your body protests,
Your joints creak like they've been personally offended, and you shuffle, silently, because silence is also part of the deal, toward the church. This is where the candlelight really comes in. Medieval monasteries did not have electricity, obviously, but they also didn't have a lot of candles to waste. Wax was expensive, tallow smelled terrible, light was rationed. So the church at night was dim, just enough light to see the outline of the altar, just enough to avoid tripping over a fellow monk who hasn't fully woken up yet. The monks stand. They chant, slowly, in Latin, which they may or may not fully understand, depending on education levels. The chanting is not energetic, it is not uplifting, it is steady, low, designed to be monotonous, because excitement leads to enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is basically joy.
Chapter 6. When Rules Met Reality. No matter how carefully a monastic schedule was written, reality had a way of leaning on it, quietly, persistently. Medieval rulebooks imagined bodies that obeyed without complaint, knights that behaved predictably, and candles that always burned when needed. Actual monasteries dealt with weather, shortages, sickness, and the basic fact that humans are not designed to run on chopped-up sleep forever. Winter was the first problem. Stone buildings held cold like a memory. Night prayer in January was not a poetic experience. It was painful. Fingers stiffened, breath fogged the air, candles struggled, wax hardened, oil thickened. Some monasteries delayed matins slightly, just enough to avoid the coldest hour. They didn't announce this as mercy, they called it prudence. Snow complicated everything. Bells froze, paths iced over. Walking to the church in the dark became dangerous. Falls happened, ankles twisted, teeth cracked. When this occurred too often, abbots quietly allowed monks to pray in the dormitory instead. Still standing, still awake, just closer to bed. Summer created the opposite problem. Heat made sleep shallow and sweaty. Candles added warmth no one wanted. Insects gathered around light and flesh with enthusiasm. Chanting slowed as energy dipped. Some monasteries shortened readings during night offices, not because of comfort, but because fainting during prayer was distracting. Food shortages also altered sleep. Fasting seasons were already demanding. Add fragmented nights, and monks became noticeably weaker. Chronic hunger combined with sleep deprivation created a dull, dragging exhaustion. Work slowed, mistakes increased. Abbots noticed, even if they didn't always admit the cause. Then there was illness. Epidemics moved through monasteries like they did everywhere else. Fevers spread quickly in communal dormitories. Night prayer became a logistical problem. Too many monks were sick to attend. Those who could still stand often carried infections unknowingly. In some cases, night offices were suspended entirely. This was rare. It was never celebrated, but it happened. When it did, monks reported feeling strangely disoriented. Sleeping through the night felt wrong, illicit. Some woke in panic, convinced they had missed the bell. Others lay awake anyway, habits trained too deeply to switch off. Rest, when finally allowed, was not immediately comforting. Shortages of candles were another practical constraint. Candle production depended on bees. Bees depended on weather. Bad seasons meant fewer candles. Fewer candles meant dimmer nights. Some monasteries rationed light aggressively, limiting nighttime movement. Monks learned to navigate by memory. Walls, steps, doorways. The building itself became familiar enough to move through blind. Rules also collided with human difference. Not everyone adapted equally. Some monks never adjusted to broken sleep. They remained perpetually foggy, slower than their peers. Officially, this was framed as spiritual struggle. Privately, it was understood as temperament. Not everyone was built for this life, but once inside, options were limited. Younger monks sometimes chafed against the schedule more than older ones. Energy made resistance possible. Questions surfaced. Why this much prayer? Why this timing? Why not sleep and pray better later? These questions rarely went far. Tradition answered them by default. Yet monasteries were not entirely rigid. Local customs developed. Some houses emphasized communal prayer more than others. Some allowed brief extra rest after particularly long services. These variations were rarely written down. They were transmitted quietly from abbot to successor. Candlelight itself became a negotiable element. In some places, lamps replaced candles. In others, torches were used briefly, then extinguished. The symbolism remained, even if the form shifted. Light against dark, wakefulness against sleep. There were also monks who simply bent the rules when no one was watching. Extra moments in bed, lingering after prayer, leaning against a wall with eyes closed just a bit too long. These were not acts of rebellion, they were acts of endurance. Abbeys that survived for centuries did so because of this quiet flexibility. The rule provided a framework, but daily life filled in the gaps. Without adjustment, monasteries emptied. With too much adjustment, they lost identity. Most found a middle ground. Interestingly, some of the strictest communities produced the most records of exceptions. The harder the ideal, the more frequently reality intruded. The language of rules stayed firm, but the lived experience softened around the edges. Visitors rarely saw this. They witnessed the official version: candlelit night prayer, disciplined silence, smooth routine. The hidden accommodations remained invisible, absorbed into the stone walls. Over time, these compromises shaped monastic culture as much as the rules themselves. They taught monks when to endure and when to yield, when to push through fatigue and when to acknowledge limits. This wisdom was never formalized, but it was passed along. So while the ideal monk slept in perfectly measured fragments, arose instantly at the bell, and prayed alertly by candlelight, the real monk negotiated, night by night, season by season, body against rule. And that negotiation, quiet and constant, is what allowed monasteries to persist. Not perfect obedience, but sustainable obedience. Not relentless vigilance, but managed wakefulness. The bell still rang, the candles still burned, but between them existed a flexible space where human needs quietly asserted themselves, ensuring that the monks could continue their long, tired devotion without collapsing entirely.
Chapter 7. How the Night Shaped the Mind. Living for years on fragmented sleep did more than tire the body. It reshaped the mind in subtle, lasting ways. Medieval monks didn't have the language to describe cognitive fatigue, but they lived inside it. Their thoughts slowed, their attention narrowed, and in many ways that was exactly the point. Monastic spirituality valued simplicity. Fewer thoughts, fewer desires, fewer distractions. Broken sleep helped with that. It dulled the edges of imagination. Big ideas arrived more slowly. Impulses lost urgency. A tired mind was a quieter mind. This wasn't framed as psychological conditioning, but the effect was real. Monks reported a kind of mental narrowing over time. The world felt smaller, more contained. Daily concerns shrank to immediate tasks: the next prayer, the next meal, the next bell. Abstract ambition faded. Candlelit prayer at night contributed to this mental state. Dim light limits visual stimulation. Repetition limits novelty. Together, they produced a gentle trance. Not sleep, not full wakefulness, something in between. This state was often described as contemplative, even if it was partly exhaustion. Monks learned to think slowly, deliberately. Quick wit and sharp humor were not encouraged. Silence favored reflection over reaction. Fragmented sleep reinforced this by making impulsive speech harder. When you're tired, you pause more. That pause became spiritualized. Over years, memory functioned differently. Short-term memory suffered. Names slipped, dates blurred, but long-term memory deepened around ritual. Psalms, prayers, and chants became embedded deeply, accessed automatically. The mind organized itself around repetition. This had emotional effects, too. High emotional peaks became rare. Joy was muted. Anger was subdued. Grief stretched thin over time rather than erupting. Monastic life didn't eliminate emotion, but it flattened it into something manageable. Some monks found this calming. The constant edge of feeling softened. Anxiety reduced. The world felt less overwhelming. Others experienced the opposite, a creeping numbness, a sense of distance from their own reactions. Medieval texts occasionally mention monks struggling with emptiness or dryness of spirit. Today, we might call it burnout. They called it acedia. Acedia was the great monastic problem, a heavy, tired sadness, not dramatic despair, just weariness of soul. Fragmented sleep was both a cause and a symptom. Night prayer was meant to fight it. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it fed it. The solution was rarely more rest. It was more structure, more prayer, more routine. The belief was that persistence would carry you through, that faith was an act, not a feeling, and acts could be performed even when feelings were absent. Candlelight again played a role. The physical presence of light, however small, anchored the mind. It gave the eyes something to rest on, a point to focus. Darkness invited wandering thoughts. Light constrained them. Silence also shaped cognition. Without constant conversation, thoughts had nowhere to go but inward. Combined with fatigue, it produced a looping mental landscape. The same ideas returned, the same prayers resurfaced. Over time, these loops smoothed out, resistance faded. Monks who lasted decades described a sense of acceptance, not happiness, not despair, acceptance. The schedule stopped feeling imposed and started feeling inevitable. The bell rang because bells rang. You rose because rising happened. Questioning fell away. This mental state made monks resilient in certain ways. External chaos affected them less. Wars, famines, political upheaval reached the monastery walls, but didn't penetrate daily rhythm. The internal schedule remained stable, even when the world was not. It also made monks conservative thinkers. Radical change was uncomfortable. The mind accustomed to repetition preferred continuity. This is part of why monasteries preserved texts rather than innovated wildly. They were guardians of stability, not engines of change. There were costs. Creativity dulled. Curiosity narrowed. Some monks struggled with doubt, but lacked the energy to explore it. Others simply found doubt faded into background noise. Fragmented sleep didn't encourage philosophical excitement. Yet, for many, this was the goal: to reduce the self, to quiet the mind, to live without constant internal chatter. Candlelit nights and broken sleep were tools toward that end. By modern standards, it might look unhealthy. By medieval standards, it looked disciplined, intentional, effective. So the night shaped the mind into something slower, steadier, and less demanding. A mind that could endure repetition without rebellion. A mind that could exist comfortably in half-light. And within that mental space, medieval monks lived their lives, not seeking intensity, not craving novelty, just moving steadily from bell to bell, thought to thought, candle to candle, until the night and the mind became equally familiar. Chapter 8. candlelight as discipline. By this point, it should be clear that candlelight was not just a convenience, it was a tool, a quiet one, a deliberately limited one. Medieval monks didn't flood their nights with light even when they could have managed a bit more. They chose restraint. Light, like sleep, was something to be rationed. Candles were expensive, yes, but that alone doesn't explain how carefully they were used. Even wealthy monasteries resisted brightness. Too much light changed the mood. It made night feel like day. That was not the goal. Night needed to remain night, dim, restrained, slightly uncomfortable. Candlelight created a narrow world. You saw what was immediately in front of you and not much else. The edges of rooms dissolved into shadow. Faces appeared and disappeared as monks moved. This limited visual field encouraged inward focus. There was nothing to look at, so attention turned inward or upward. It also enforced slowness. Bright light invites movement. Dim light discourages it. You walked carefully. You stood still. You didn't rush. Everything took longer. This stretched time, making night prayer feel longer than it technically was. Duration mattered less than experience.
Monks learned to read candlelight. The size of the flame told you how much time had passed. The length of the candle marked the progression of prayer. Wax dripping was not an annoyance, it was a clock, a quiet one. The sensory environment was intentionally limited. Sound was soft, light was low, smell was faint wax and stone, touch was cold walls and rough fabric. This sensory restraint reduced stimulation. The mind had fewer inputs to process, which, again, conveniently made staying awake easier in a dull, steady way. Candlelight also reinforced hierarchy. The abbot's candle was often placed slightly higher. The altar was better lit than the choir stalls. These differences were subtle but meaningful. Light marked importance without spectacle. At night, individuality faded. In daylight, monks could recognize one another easily. At night, everyone looked the same. Habits blended. Faces were half-lit. Voices merged. Identity softened into community. This was intentional. The self was meant to dissolve into the group. Candles were also fragile. They went out easily. A draft, a careless movement. When a candle extinguished, someone relit it quietly, no fuss. Darkness was never allowed to linger, but neither was light allowed to dominate. This fragility reinforced attentiveness. You had to notice when light failed. Vigilance was constant, not anxious, just present. There was symbolism layered on top of this practicality. Christ as light, faith as flame, vigilance as keeping the candle burning. Medieval monks were steeped in this imagery. They didn't separate metaphor from experience. The candle wasn't representing discipline, it was discipline. Interestingly, candlelight also discouraged emotional extremes. Bright environments can energize, dark ones can depress. Dim light sits in between, it steadies mood. Monks didn't feel euphoric during night prayer. They didn't usually feel despair either. They felt neutral. Neutrality was prized. Over years, monks developed an instinctive comfort with half-light. Full darkness felt unsettling. Full brightness felt intrusive. The in-between became home. This extended beyond the monastery. Older monks visiting towns sometimes found daylight overwhelming. Too many details, too much noise. Candlelight shaped posture, too. Heads bowed slightly, shoulders relaxed, eyes half-lidded. The body mirrored the environment, alert enough, not fully engaged. There were moments, rare but remembered, when candlelight felt beautiful. A flame catching gold leaf on a manuscript, shadows moving across stone carvings, a quiet harmony of voices and light. These moments were not chased, they arrived accidentally. That made them acceptable. But most nights were not like that. Most nights were simply dim, functional, repetitive, and that was the point. By limiting light, monasteries limited desire. There was nothing to crave visually, no spectacle, no novelty, just enough illumination to fulfill duty. So candlelight became an unspoken instructor. It taught patience, it taught restraint, it taught how to exist comfortably without stimulation. And in a life built around fragmented sleep and constant repetition, that lesson mattered. The monks didn't just sleep in shifts by candlelight. They learned to think, move, and exist within its narrow glow. The flame did not inspire, it did not entertain, it simply stayed lit. And that, in the end, was exactly what medieval monastic life asked of the people who lived by it.
Monks also learned to anticipate one another's needs. When a candle flickered too low, someone reached silently to steady it. When a bell rang for matins, the slowest risers were nudged forward subtly. The community moved together, almost unconsciously, guided by exhaustion, habit, and candlelight. Even prayer itself became communal in subtle ways. Chanting in dim light, half asleep, bodies swaying slightly, created a synchronized rhythm. Mistakes were corrected gently. Voices rose and fell in patterns that comforted the tired mind. The environment, the bell, the candle, and the group all worked together to maintain cohesion. Over decades, this shaped monastery culture. New monks were inducted not just into ritual, but into this shared experience of exhaustion. They learned the language of tired bodies, the signals of dim candlelight, the rhythms of slow communal life. Survival depended on understanding and participating in this quiet network of cues. In this way, fatigue became a social glue. It was not a punishment exactly, nor was it accidental. It was a byproduct of rules and routines that inadvertently created intimacy, subtlety, and interdependence. Monks became attuned to one another in ways outsiders rarely understood. By the end of a long night, when dawn approached and the final prayers echoed faintly through stone halls, the community had persisted. No one was fully rested, no one was fully alert, and yet everyone had moved through the hours together, guided by the bell, candlelight, and shared gentle exhaustion. And that, in many ways, was the quiet miracle of monastic life. Not heroic feats or dramatic events, just hundreds of people living in close quarters, sleeping in fragments, and learning how to coexist in half-light over and over, year after year. Chapter 10. The Rhythm That Endured. By this stage, the monastery's nighttime rhythm had become second nature. The fragments of sleep, the flickering candlelight, the steady toll of the bell, all had fused into a continuous, unbroken pattern that shaped every aspect of daily life. Monks did not merely follow the schedule. Their bodies, minds, and even emotions had adapted to it, often before conscious thought could catch up. Decades of repetition produced subtle, almost imperceptible transformations. Movements became economical. Walking to the church in the dark was instinctive. Chanting without full wakefulness was second nature. Even minor deviations, lingering a moment too long in bed, fumbling with a candle, felt jarring because the internal clock of the monastery demanded fidelity. Yet life was never perfect. Candles burned out, bells cracked or fell silent. Illness struck. Winter brought frostbite. Summer brought heat and insects. Food shortages tested endurance. Still, the rhythm endured because it was flexible in ways the rule books never recorded. Monks learned the art of quiet adaptation. They nudged one another, adjusted flame heights, shuffled reading responsibilities, and sometimes whispered reminders. These small, practical compromises ensured that the larger structure, the daily cycle of partial sleep, prayer, and vigilance, remained intact. Monastic life was built on this tension between rigidity and adaptation. The schedule demanded obedience, reality demanded negotiation. Over time, monks internalized both. They learned that the bell always rang, even if a candle went out, that sleep would be fragmented, but rhythm could be maintained, that suffering, discomfort, and fatigue were inevitable, yet manageable. Perhaps most importantly, the rhythm instilled patience. Life in the monastery was intentionally slow, measured, and deliberate. There were no dramatic turns of fortune in candlelit night offices, no exhilarating victories, no crushing defeats. Everything unfolded in increments: a whispered prayer, a flickering flame, a slow step down a cold corridor. Monks learned to inhabit the monotony and find a kind of quiet endurance in it. This slow tempo shaped perception of time itself. Years passed almost imperceptibly, measured less by calendar dates than by repeated cycles of bells and light. The monks' lives were anchored by routine rather than novelty. Each fragment of sleep, each prayer, each half-lit corridor became a marker in the long, steady passage of years. In practical terms, the rhythm also ensured survival. Communities remained functional despite illness, age, or misfortune. Shared fatigue created subtle cohesion, while disciplined wakefulness maintained vigilance. The monastery could persist through harsh winters, epidemics, and social upheaval. Its endurance depended less on heroic individual efforts than on the collective adherence to this persistent, gentle cadence. Candlelight, fragmented sleep, and the tolling bell became intertwined with identity. To be a monk was to rise, pray, rest in fragments, and repeat. These patterns shaped thought, memory, and emotion. Monks internalized the rhythm so deeply that leaving the monastery could be disorienting. Life outside lacked the structured predictability that had guided decades of existence. Visitors occasionally remarked on the eerie calm of the nighttime monastery. The flicker of candles, the soft murmur of prayer, the slow shuffle of tired feet, all seemed foreign, yet strangely ordered. Outsiders rarely grasped how much coordination, shared fatigue, and subtle social signaling underpinned that tranquility. What appeared effortless was the product of careful training, habitual adjustment, and centuries of institutional experience. And so the rhythm endured. The bell continued to toll, the candles continued to flicker, monks continued to rise, pray, and rest in fragments. Life continued, quiet and measured, shaped by centuries of tradition and the unremarkable persistence of human bodies adapting to strict, half-lit schedules. In this slow, steady way, medieval monastic communities not only survived, they thrived in a manner appropriate to their goals, not with excitement, innovation, or loud victories, but with endurance, patience, and an uncanny ability to inhabit fragmented nights as if they were natural. And in doing so, they left behind a testament to how human life can bend and persist quietly, one candle-lit hour at a time. Chapter 11. The Gentle Tyranny of the Bell. The bell was the true master of monastic life, not the abbot, not the rulebook, certainly not the candle. The bell dictated the pace, sliced the night into fragments, and reminded every monk repeatedly that obedience was expected and inevitable. Its sound was simple, almost mundane, but its effect was profound.
No one ignored it. At first, new monks flinched when it rang unexpectedly, startled from rest or half-dreams. But within weeks, their bodies adapted. The moment a bell tolled, a series of reflexes kicked in. Eyes opened, feet swung over straw mattresses, habits were adjusted, and heads bowed automatically. It became a kind of rhythm encoded into the muscles and nervous system. The bell's authority extended to every aspect of the monastery. Night offices, daytime prayers, meals, work shifts, all conformed to its tolling. There were no negotiations. Bells did not consult schedules, they imposed them. The only flexibility was how monks responded, and even that was guided by centuries of ritual, habit, and communal expectation. Interestingly, the bell shaped perception of time in subtle ways. Fragmented sleep meant that the usual markers of night, moon, stars, darkness, were less significant than the tolling of bronze. 1 bell, 2 bells, 3. The night became a series of auditory cues. Time was counted in sound, not in hours. Deep sleep was rare, but awareness of passage persisted. Monks knew when an office ended or began by tone and repetition. Fatigue made this system both challenging and strangely comforting. The tired mind relies on patterns. Bells provided them. Even when consciousness wavered, the rhythm of sound offered orientation. It was a guide, a metronome, and a quiet overseer all in one. The bell also reinforced hierarchy indirectly. Senior monks learned to anticipate its tolls. They adjusted movements, nudged younger monks, or silently corrected mistakes. Novices followed, bodies and minds trained to respond appropriately. The bell was impartial, but the human interpretation of it created subtle structures of mentorship and authority. Beyond practicality, the bell carried symbolic weight. It reminded monks of Christ, of vigilance, and of eternity. Each toll suggested that time was finite and sacred. Missing a bell was not just an error, it was a moral lapse. The sound carried layers of meaning, even when no one spoke them aloud. Yet the bell was also a source of gentle tension. Too loud, and it startled sleepers unnecessarily. Too soft, and someone might fail to respond. Abbeys spent time calibrating tones, hammering metal, and maintaining mechanisms, ensuring that the signal was neither harsh nor ineffective. The goal was precise authority without chaos. Monks often described nights as a conversation between body and bell. The body resisted, craving uninterrupted rest. The bell insisted, unwavering. Over time, monks learned compromise. Muscles moved before the mind fully woke. Eyes opened half reluctantly, half obediently. Movement and sound coexisted. Fatigue persisted, but function did too. This quiet, persistent interaction shaped character. Patience was required. Observation was required. Self-discipline became reflexive. The bell did not demand heroics. It demanded consistency. And that consistency, applied across years, created a culture of endurance that extended far beyond nighttime prayer. Even when bells failed, cracked, broken, or muffled by distance, monks improvised. They coordinated by memory, by sight of flickering candles, and by listening for distant murmurs. The community had internalized the rhythm so deeply that the sound itself was less critical than the structure it represented. Thus, the bell ruled gently but relentlessly. It governed the night, shaped sleep, coordinated action, and instilled discipline without words. Its authority was silent yet pervasive, creating a life measured not by ambition or desire, but by rhythm, repetition, and the steady tolling of sound across stone corridors. And so, as candles flickered in dim dormitories, as sleep came in small increments, and as voices rose and fell with practiced precision, the bell remained the quiet, inescapable ruler of the night, neither harsh nor indulgent, but exacting in its own subtle, persistent way. Chapter 12. The Slow Shaping of Habit. By now, it is clear that medieval monastic life was less about drama and more about slow transformation. Repetition, candlelight, fragmented sleep, and the bell combined to create a lifestyle that reshaped everything: body, mind, and social interaction. This shaping was gradual, almost imperceptible, but profound. Habit became the dominant force. At first, new monks struggled. Rising at odd hours felt unnatural. Chanting in half-darkness made mistakes more frequent. Sleep felt fragmented and unsatisfying. But as days, weeks, and months passed, the body began to anticipate the schedule. Movements became efficient, eyes opened just before the bell, hands adjusted candles without conscious thought, feet moved through dormitories with memorized precision. These physical habits fed into mental patterns. Thoughts slowed, focused on repetition rather than novelty. Memory prioritized psalms, chants, and routine tasks. Reflection replaced impulsive thought. Emotion flattened into consistent calm or low-level fatigue. The fragmented night reshaped attention, patience, and perception of time. Social habits formed alongside personal ones. Monks learned subtle cues when a candle flicker required intervention, when a misstep in prayer needed correction, when to move silently to avoid disturbing neighbors. Shared exhaustion reinforced communal awareness. Body language, whispering, and gesture became more important than words. Habit also regulated morality indirectly. The constant, slow rhythms discouraged impulsivity and indulgence. Desire for comfort was moderated by candlelight, expectation, and communal observation. Every small decision, how long to rest, when to light a candle, how carefully to move, reinforced obedience. Discipline became a lived experience, embedded in muscle memory and the quiet expectation of peers. This shaping was cumulative. Decades of fragmented nights, dim light, and repeated ritual gradually built a mind and body adapted to endurance. New monks learned from observation as much as instruction. The monastery functioned as a training ground for resilience, patience, and low-level vigilance. Even when bells failed, cracked, broken, or muffled by distance, monks improvised. They coordinated by memory, by sight of flickering candles, and by listening for distant murmurs. The community had internalized the rhythm so deeply that the sound itself was less critical than the structure it represented. Thus, the bell ruled gently but relentlessly. It governed the night, shaped sleep, coordinated action, and instilled discipline without words. Its authority was silent yet pervasive, creating a life measured not by ambition or desire, but by rhythm, repetition, and the steady tolling of sound across stone corridors. And so, as candles flickered in dim dormitories, as sleep came in small increments, and as voices rose and fell with practiced precision, the bell remained the quiet, inescapable ruler of the night, neither harsh nor indulgent, but exacting in its own subtle, persistent way. Chapter 12. The Slow Shaping of Habit. By now, it is clear that medieval monastic life was less about drama and more about slow transformation. Repetition, candlelight, fragmented sleep, and the bell combined to create a lifestyle that reshaped everything: body, mind, and social interaction. This shaping was gradual, almost imperceptible, but profound. Habit became the dominant force. At first, new monks struggled. Rising at odd hours felt unnatural. Chanting in half-darkness made mistakes more frequent. Sleep felt fragmented and unsatisfying. But as days, weeks, and months passed, the body began to anticipate the schedule. Movements became efficient. Eyes opened just before the bell. Hands adjusted candles without conscious thought. Feet moved through dormitories with memorized precision. These physical habits fed into mental patterns. Thoughts slowed, focused on repetition rather than novelty. Memory prioritized psalms, chants, and routine tasks. Reflection replaced impulsive thought. Emotion flattened into consistent calm or low-level fatigue. The fragmented night reshaped attention, patience, and perception of time. Social habits formed alongside personal ones. Monks learned subtle cues when a candle flicker required intervention,
when a misstep in prayer needed correction, when to move silently to avoid disturbing neighbors.
Interestingly, this process also produced subtle egalitarianism. Nobility, prior status, or personal ambition mattered less than how well one adapted to the daily pattern. Everyone faced the same fragmented sleep, the same candlelit darkness, and the same demands of the bell. Success in this environment was measured not by wealth or talent, but by integration into habit. Candlelight again reinforced this. The dim illumination encouraged careful movement, slowed thought, and moderated emotion. It acted as a physical guide to habit, reminding the body and mind of proper pacing. Over time, the half-lit environment became a cue for behavior, signaling that this was a space for patience, endurance, and repetition. By the time a monk had spent decades in the monastery, the shaping was complete. The body and mind functioned as extensions of the daily rhythm. Sleep in fragments, prayer in cycles, movement guided by candlelight, awareness anchored to the bell. These patterns were internalized. The rhythm had become identity. And in this slow, quiet, unremarkable shaping of habit, monasteries produced generations of men capable of enduring the night without complaint, moving through the dark with calm efficiency, and living lives that, while monotonous to outsiders, were coherent, disciplined, and surprisingly resilient. The slow shaping of habit, more than doctrine or zeal, ensured the persistence of monastic life. Over years, decades, and centuries, the monastery became a machine for endurance, patience, and subtle communal harmony. One bell, one candle, and one fragmented night at a time. Chapter 13. Fasting, Fatigue, and Focus. No discussion of medieval monastic life is complete without acknowledging fasting. Food restrictions were woven into the calendar, layered on top of fragmented sleep, candlelight, and the bell. The two combined, hunger and fatigue, produced a unique state of mind and body which monasteries relied on to cultivate focus and restraint. Fasting schedules varied. Some monasteries limited meat entirely. Others restricted dairy, eggs, or fish on specific days. Lenten fasts lasted weeks. Daily meals were often minimal, thin soups, bread, sometimes legumes. The goal was never comfort. Hunger was an intentional companion to discipline, a tool to remind the monk that his body was subordinate to spiritual life. Hunger and fragmented sleep reinforced each other. A half-asleep body digesting minimal calories became slow, deliberate, predictable. Energy spikes were rare, impulses dulled. The mind, shaped by partial wakefulness and modest nourishment, became steady and unadventurous. Creativity and exuberance faded, but patience and focus deepened. Fasting also reinforced community cohesion. Shared hunger created shared experience. Complaints were rare, not because monks were saintly, but because everyone was in the same situation. Observing one another's endurance or subtle struggles reinforced empathy and subtle social coordination. The entire monastery moved together, bodies slowed by both night and diet. Meals themselves became ritual. Eating was not a sensory indulgence, but an act of discipline. Silence was often maintained. Portions were carefully measured. The minimal food intake meant that daytime lethargy and nighttime vigilance were both heightened, producing a kind of low-energy continuity that guided the body smoothly from task to task. Fasting also amplified the effects of fragmented sleep. Tired and slightly hungry, monks' attention turned inward. Chanting, prayer, and reflection were easier to focus on because there were fewer distractions. Fatigue and hunger, rather than being obstacles, became instruments.
They sharpened the tools of contemplation while suppressing the energy for impulsive action. Even missteps, overindulgence, accidental extra bites, or fainting from hunger were absorbed quietly into communal life. There were rules, of course. Confession, penance, and correction were part of the structure, but the overarching principle remained. The monk's body was secondary to the rhythm of life, to the bell, to candlelight, and to centuries of tradition. Monks learned to read their own limits. They paced eating, walking, prayer, and even micro-rests carefully. Habit and rhythm, more than willpower, kept them functional. The body, trained over years of fragmented sleep and fasting, became an instrument of endurance. Interestingly, the combination of partial sleep and modest food produced a unique mental clarity, even if it was narrow. Abstract thought slowed, creativity dimmed, but focus on ritual tasks increased. Repetition became easier to tolerate. Chants were memorized more firmly. Observations about communal life registered subtly. Tiny cues became meaningful. Candlelight and the bell reinforced this. Dim illumination slowed movement, encouraged reflection, and softened emotional extremes. The bell segmented time, guiding attention in predictable increments. Hunger and sleep deprivation, paired with these cues, produced monks who were fully integrated into the rhythm of the monastery, body and mind aligned with ritual rather than personal desire. Thus, fasting was not merely asceticism. It was a tool for shaping the experience of night, for aligning mind and body with long-term rhythm, and for ensuring that the fragments of sleep and labor produced not chaos, but steady endurance. In combination, candlelight, fragmented sleep, and fasting created the ideal monastic state, attentive without excess, obedient without coercion, enduring without complaint. And it is in this quiet, measured environment that the true structure of medieval monastic life becomes clear. A life that operated in fragments, guided by rhythm, and shaped by gentle, persistent constraint. Chapter 14. The Subtle Art of Pacing. Once a monk had lived in the monastery for several years, he learned the subtle art of pacing. This was not a formally taught skill. It was absorbed through repetition, observation, and quiet trial and error. Sleep in fragments, fasting, candlelight, and bells all contributed, creating a life in which energy, movement, and attention were carefully rationed. Pacing began with the body. Muscles learned to conserve energy. Movements became minimal, efficient, precise. Steps across cold stone corridors were deliberate, not hurried. Lifting candles, arranging books, or moving between offices required small economic gestures. Every unnecessary motion consumed energy the monk could ill afford, and the habit of economy became second nature. The mind followed. Fatigue and hunger limited mental bandwidth, so monks focused on essentials. Chanting, prayer, copying manuscripts, and observing communal life filled attention. Anything beyond these tasks, the extraneous thought, the distraction, was naturally filtered out. The mental landscape became narrow but reliable. Pacing taught moderation in thought as well as action.
Time itself was divided carefully. Hours of wakefulness alternated with brief rests, and the mind adjusted to anticipate these periods. Naps were strategically placed when permitted. Vigorous tasks were aligned with moments of relative alertness. Even moments of waiting, for bells, for meals, for reading, were folded into the rhythm without panic or wasted effort. Pacing extended to emotion. The half-lit, fragmented nights dulled extremes. Joy, anger, or sorrow emerged slowly, muted by fatigue. Emotional energy was rationed unconsciously, preventing outbursts or disruptions.
Monks learned to move through internal states as deliberately as they moved through the cloister. Social pacing was equally important. In a community governed by subtle cues and shared exhaustion, rushing or overexerting oneself disrupted harmony. Walking too quickly down a corridor, speaking too loudly, or performing tasks unevenly could create ripple effects. Experienced monks learned to move at the tempo of the group, adjusting instinctively to the pace of peers. Even prayer required pacing. Chanting too quickly exhausted breath and focus. Chanting too slowly disrupted the collective rhythm. Dim candlelight and partial sleep made this especially delicate. Monks developed a sense of cadence, a mental metronome informed by internal fatigue and external cues. Illness, aging, and seasonal changes tested pacing constantly. A fevered monk reduced capacity for movement and attention. Winter nights were longer, colder, more fatiguing. Summer heat drained energy. Monks adapted incrementally, adjusting step, chant, and attention without altering the overarching rhythm. Pacing became a flexible skill, resilient in the face of discomfort. Pacing also reinforced habit. Movement, thought, and emotion were all coordinated with fragments of sleep, the bell's toll, and the candle's flicker. These elements acted as scaffolding, guiding action and preserving continuity across days, months, and decades. Even when an external factor disrupted the schedule, like illness, shortages, or mechanical failure, internal pacing maintained functionality. Over decades, pacing shaped identity. Monks did not merely follow the schedule, they became the schedule. Their bodies, minds, and interactions harmonized with the monastery's rhythm. Energy and attention were calibrated precisely to the environment. Desire and impulse were moderated by fatigue, darkness, and ritual. In this way, the art of pacing transformed the potentially punishing aspects of monastic life: fragmented sleep, fasting, candlelight, constant bells, into a sustainable, almost graceful endurance. The monks' lives were slow, quiet, and measured, but they were also deliberate, coherent, and astonishingly resilient. Through pacing, the monastery created not just obedience, but adaptability, not just discipline, but continuity, not just endurance, but a subtle, enduring harmony between body, mind, and community. And in that slow, careful alignment, medieval monks navigated the long night with remarkable, quiet effectiveness.
By living within the constraints of fragmented sleep, fasting, dim candlelight, and constant bells, generations of monks absorbed an education invisible to outsiders. It was not flashy, dramatic, or immediately gratifying. It was slow, cumulative, and deeply effective. And in the quiet, careful accumulation of experience, the monastery ensured that life, ritual, and rhythm could persist, not just for a single monk, but for entire communities, century after century. Chapter 18. The Comfort of Routine. Routine, as monotonous as it might appear to outsiders, became one of the most sustaining features of monastic life. The bell, the candle, fragmented sleep, fasting, and quiet tasks all converged to produce an environment in which every day, hour, and moment was anticipated. This predictability, far from being boring in the strictest sense, offered a subtle kind of comfort. The human mind craves patterns, and the monastery provided them abundantly. Each night followed a familiar arc: the rise at the bell, movement through dim corridors, low murmurs of prayer, and measured pacing between tasks. Even the small adjustments, leaning against a wall for a micro-rest, trimming a candle wick, or pacing through the dormitory, became part of a reliable, repeated script. Routine also mitigated anxiety.
The world outside monasteries was uncertain, filled with political turmoil, disease, and scarcity. Inside, the day and night unfolded in predictable increments. Sleep, though fragmented, occurred at expected moments. Meals, though modest, came on schedule. Work, prayer, and reflection cycled in steady repetition. Predictability reduced cognitive load and created a sense of control within an otherwise demanding environment. Emotional regulation was another benefit. Fragmented sleep and fasting naturally flattened highs and lows, but routine reinforced that effect. Knowing what to expect next, when to rise, when to pray, when to rest, prevented sudden emotional fluctuations. Over years, monks internalized these rhythms so thoroughly that even disruptions were absorbed calmly. A misfired candle or a cracked bell might slightly disturb a novice, but an experienced monk adjusted seamlessly. Routine also reinforced skill. Chanting, manuscript copying, cleaning, and simple maintenance became second nature. Movements, once awkward, were honed by repetition. Mistakes were noticed and corrected gently, often without verbal instruction. By embedding expertise within daily habits, the monastery ensured that practical knowledge endured across generations. Social dynamics, too, benefited from routine. Shared schedules minimized conflict and confusion. Everyone knew when to be silent, when to speak, when to rise, when to rest. Coordination emerged naturally, reducing the need for constant oversight. Shared experience of predictable rhythm reinforced cohesion and mutual understanding. Even the mind benefited from this monotony. Focus narrowed, attention deepened, and reflection became easier in the absence of novelty or distraction. Monks were trained to inhabit long stretches of quiet repetition, cultivating a contemplative awareness that would have been difficult to achieve in a more stimulating environment. The comfort of routine did not eliminate challenge. Fatigue persisted, hunger persisted, cold persisted. But within the constraints of discomfort, predictability allowed life to proceed smoothly. The rhythms of candle, bell, prayer, and rest became scaffolding for endurance, patience, and subtle skill. Over decades, routine became identity. Monks did not merely live by the schedule, they were molded by it. Body, mind, and social interaction synchronized with the slow, deliberate cycles of monastic life. Routine, in its quiet constancy, became both a shield and a guide, smoothing the passage of time and ensuring the persistence of community. And in this gentle predictability, medieval monks found a strange, quiet comfort. Life was not thrilling, it was not sensational, but it was survivable, teachable, and remarkably enduring, a testament to the subtle power of consistent, unchanging rhythm. Chapter 19. Endurance as Identity. After decades in the monastery, endurance itself became a defining feature of identity. Monks were not merely adherents to a set of rules, they were embodiments of the system they inhabited. Fragmented sleep, dim candlelight, fasting, repetitive prayer, and the toll of bells collectively shaped body, mind, and emotion into instruments of steady persistence. By middle age, most monks could anticipate each day before it began. The bell signaled movement almost reflexively. Candlelight guided posture and attention. Meals and micro-rests were integrated seamlessly into the day's rhythm. Even fatigue and hunger, once obstacles, had become familiar companions, providing a subtle framework for pacing thought and action. Endurance also defined social identity. Within the monastery, hierarchy mattered less than reliability. Nobility, prior status, or personal ambition were secondary to the ability to follow the rhythm of communal life. A monk's standing grew from his consistency,
his ability to participate fully in the cycles of wakefulness, prayer, and work, rather than any outward display of knowledge or skill. Emotionally, endurance was both shield and measure. Peaks and troughs were muted. Joy, irritation, and sorrow existed, but within narrow bounds. Emotional energy was conserved for ritual, communal coordination, and the maintenance of internal balance. Long-term stability, rather than momentary excitement, became the standard of well-being. Even illness and aging reinforced this identity. Physical decline did not remove monks from participation, it merely altered pacing and emphasis. Micro-rests became more frequent. Candlelight, bells, and communal support allowed continued engagement with ritual and work. Endurance, in this context, was not mere survival, it was a way of inhabiting life fully within limitations. By the time a monk approached the end of his life, his entire existence had been structured around endurance. Fragmented sleep, dim light, and repetitive labor were not inconveniences, they were integral to the shaping of identity. The rhythm of the monastery had fused with his physical, mental, and social being. He was endurance in motion, a living product of the monastery's quiet, persistent discipline. This identity extended subtly to legacy. Younger monks absorbed lessons by observation and imitation. Experience, skill, and subtle social coordination passed along silently.
Candlelight also guided rhythm. The size and longevity of a candle provided a temporal cue. Wax melting, flame flickering, and shadows shifting indicated the passage of time during night offices. Monks learned to read these subtle signs, internalizing a temporal awareness that complemented the bell's tolling. Time became tactile and visual, not just auditory. Social coordination was similarly influenced. Proximity to a flame suggested responsibility. The monk closest to the candle might lead prayer, adjust the flame, or supervise a task. Positioning in light and shadow became a non-verbal communication system, reinforcing hierarchy and expectation without disrupting silence. There was aesthetic subtlety, too. Shadows danced across carved stone, manuscripts glimmered faintly, and the flicker emphasized the rhythm of chanting voices. Moments of beauty were rare, unforced, and fleeting, acceptable precisely because they were incidental, not sought. The environment taught appreciation for moderation and restraint. Over years, monks developed an almost instinctive relationship with light. Full darkness was uncomfortable, full brightness intrusive. Dim, flickering candlelight became normative, shaping posture, gaze, and social interaction. The interplay of illumination and shadow dictated much of the day-to-day experience, quietly conditioning both body and mind. Through candlelight, the monastery taught subtle lessons: patience, attention, humility, and coordination. Light became more than practical. It was a guide, an instructor, and a structural element of rhythm. It reinforced endurance, habituated perception, and integrated the community into a slow, deliberate cadence of action. In the long centuries of monastic practice, this interplay of light and shadow became inseparable from identity. The monk's existence, lived in half-light and punctuated by bells and fragmented sleep, was molded by these gentle cues. Candlelight, though modest, shaped perception, behavior, and the very rhythm of life, proving that even the faintest flame can exert enduring influence over human habit and community. Chapter 22. The Quiet Mastery of Space. Life in a medieval monastery demanded not only endurance of time, but also mastery of space. Dormitories, cloisters, chapels, and libraries were all navigated repeatedly, often in dim candlelight and partial wakefulness.
Over years, monks developed a subtle, almost unconscious understanding of their environment, moving with precision that outsiders might call instinct, but which was really learned, patient adaptation. Corridors became familiar landscapes. The texture of stone underfoot, the location of steps, doorways, and obstacles were memorized. Even in near darkness, monks could traverse long halls without stumbling. Knowledge of space was cumulative, built over repeated nights and days of careful movement. Each monk internalized the monastery's geography, and deviations like temporary furnishings or maintenance work were accommodated quietly, without disruption. Dormitories, often long and sparsely furnished, demanded personal organization. Beds were assigned with careful attention to proximity, light, and convenience. Small adjustments, positioning a blanket, aligning a pillow, or leaving personal items in precise spots ensured smooth functioning in low light and minimal disruption to neighbors. Spatial mastery minimized error, conserved energy, and reinforced communal harmony. Chapel spaces where night offices were held were similarly internalized. Each monk knew his place relative to others, to candles, and to ritual objects. Chanting in synchrony, observing gestures, and adjusting posture required coordination. Mistakes could be corrected subtly, and the spatial familiarity allowed smooth, quiet functioning, even during hours of fatigue. Libraries and scriptoria presented additional challenges. Manuscripts, desks, and lecterns were arranged to maximize efficiency in dim light. Moving between reading, copying, or organizing texts demanded careful planning. Over time, monks internalized layouts so thoroughly that they could retrieve a manuscript without conscious thought, moving from task to task seamlessly. Even shared spaces required negotiation. In kitchens, refectories, or workshops, multiple monks moved simultaneously. Coordination relied on subtle observation, shadows, flickers of candlelight, slight movements. Awareness of spatial dynamics prevented accidents and maintained rhythm without constant verbal instruction. Spatial mastery also reinforced psychological stability. Familiarity with corridors, rooms, and ritual spaces provided orientation when sleep was fragmented and energy low. The body knew where to go before the mind fully registered. Predictability in space became a form of comfort, reducing anxiety and facilitating endurance. Over decades, this quiet skill became second nature. Monks moved through the monastery like extensions of the architecture itself. Their movements, awareness, and rhythm were intertwined with the physical environment, each action guided by the memory of countless nights and years of repeated practice. Ultimately, mastery of space complemented mastery of time. Candles, bells, fragmented sleep, fasting, and ritual defined temporal rhythm. Familiarity with corridors, dormitories, chapels, and libraries allowed smooth, efficient navigation. Together, they shaped a life of quiet endurance, deliberate action, and patient observation. The monastery, as a physical and temporal landscape, became both teacher and framework. In learning to inhabit it fully, monks developed skills, habits, and a sense of calm coordination that defined their identity. Endurance was not only a matter of time.
Was spatial, physical, and communal, a subtle mastery that allowed centuries of monastic life to persist with quiet effectiveness. As decades passed, the repetitive rhythm of monastic life became more than a structure. It became a refuge. Fragmented sleep, dim candlelight, fasting, and the tolling of bells created a predictable world, one in which the mind and body could settle into a steady cadence. The ordinary, almost monotonous pace of life provided comfort, stability, and a framework for endurance. The night, once potentially disorienting or tiring, became familiar and navigable. Candles flickered predictably, casting consistent shadows.
Bells tolled at expected intervals, signaling movement and ritual. Even fragmented sleep followed a pattern, broken into small, manageable segments. Monks learned to anticipate these moments, and in doing so, they gained a quiet sense of control over the passage of time. Routine reduced uncertainty. In the outside world, events were unpredictable. Illness, political turmoil, or scarcity could disrupt life abruptly. Within the monastery, however, the rhythm governed experience. Tasks, prayers, and rest occurred with reliable precision. The structure provided a buffer against chaos, offering psychological stability that helped sustain long-term endurance. This rhythm also shaped social cohesion. Monks moved, ate, and prayed together. Shared experience of fatigue, hunger, and low light fostered subtle understanding and empathy. Gestures, glances, and minor adjustments of position became a language of connection. The community functioned not through constant supervision, but through the predictable cadence of its members, synchronized by habit and experience. Even mental life benefited. The monotony of repeated tasks, chanting, copying manuscripts, tending candles, encouraged reflection, focus, and attention to subtle details. Distraction was minimized by fatigue, dim light, and ritual repetition. Thoughts narrowed, but depth increased. Awareness of self, of community, and of time became finely attuned. Emotionally, rhythm provided calm. Peaks of excitement or anxiety were dampened by repetition and fatigue. Endurance rather than intensity defined experience. The mind learned to move steadily, unhurried through the night and day, guided by sound, light, and habit. Over decades, this predictable pattern became internalized. Monks instinctively responded to bells, anticipated ritual sequences, and navigated corridors without conscious thought. Fragmented sleep, fasting, and dim illumination no longer felt like obstacles. They became cues, guides, and measures of identity. The rhythm of life defined existence. Ultimately, rhythm acted as both scaffolding and sanctuary. It allowed monks to inhabit time and space with calm efficiency, to endure discomfort without collapse, and to integrate body, mind, and community into a coherent whole. The night, once a potential trial, became a realm of predictable flow. In this slow, persistent cadence, the monastery achieved something remarkable. Life structured entirely by rhythm, habit, and subtle adaptation. Fragmented sleep, dim candlelight, fasting, and ritual were not just endured, they were transformed into a continuous, quiet refuge. And within this refuge, generations of monks moved steadily through time, sustained by the gentle constancy of rhythm itself. Movement within the monastery became a form of meditation. Walking down cold stone corridors, handling candles, or shuffling between offices was not merely functional, it was rhythmic, deliberate, and quietly reflective. Over years of practice, even the most mundane actions were infused with attentiveness, creating a subtle internal harmony that complemented fragmented sleep and ritual repetition. Each step carried awareness. Monks learned to feel the stone underfoot, to sense the weight of their bodies, to coordinate breath with movement. This attentiveness turned ordinary motion into a practice of patience and presence. Dim candlelight slowed perception, encouraging careful adjustment of posture, balance, and attention. Movement became a way to inhabit the present moment, a meditation embedded in daily necessity. Tasks such as lighting candles, arranging manuscripts, or preparing for prayer were similarly meditative. Repetition allowed mastery, while low light and partial fatigue heightened awareness of subtle variations. The slight flicker of a flame, the rustle of a page,
the distant echo of a bell, all became part of a sensory landscape that focused attention without urgency. Even communal movement had its rhythm. Monks coordinated their steps, pacing, and gestures with neighbors. Silence was preserved. Minor corrections, nudges, subtle glances, or micro-adjustments of position ensured cohesion. Motion, both individual and shared, reinforced social harmony as much as physical endurance. The meditation of motion also reinforced pacing and energy management. Fatigue, fasting, and fragmented sleep required conscious moderation. Over time, monks developed an instinctive sense of when to conserve energy, when to accelerate, and when to rest briefly. The body became finely attuned to its own limits, guided by rhythm rather than conscious calculation. Even error contributed to practice. Missteps, fumbled candles, or accidental disruptions were minor lessons in observation, patience, and correction. Each small mistake,
perpetuating endurance across generations. The monastery's rhythm, its candlelit nights and segmented sleep, ensured continuity not only in ritual, but in the cultivation of resilience and measured, patient existence. Endurance, in essence, became the silent goal of monastic life. Not virtue, not heroism, not brilliance, simply the capacity to persist steadily, calmly, and predictably through decades of half-light, fragmented sleep, and repeated ritual. And in this quiet, relentless persistence, medieval monks forged lives that were disciplined, stable, and remarkably enduring, even if entirely removed from worldly excitement or acclaim. As centuries passed, the rhythms honed in candlelit dormitories left a legacy that extended far beyond individual monks. The pattern of fragmented sleep, fasting, repetitive ritual, and the steady tolling of bells became encoded in monastic culture, shaping generations of practitioners long after the original architects of the system had passed. New novices entering the monastery encountered these inherited patterns as though they were natural laws. Candlelight guided them, fatigue shaped their movements, and bells dictated their schedule. Habits, pacing, and endurance had been passed down not through explicit instruction alone, but through lived example, subtle cues, and the collective memory of the community. The night itself became a teacher. Dim illumination, silence, and partial rest were not merely conditions, they were instruments of learning. Monks absorbed discipline, patience, and attentiveness through the slow repetition of these experiences. Knowledge of ritual, community, and endurance was internalized gradually, like muscle memory. The night shaped the mind, body, and social cohesion in ways that textbooks never could. Even architectural design reflected the influence of nocturnal life. Narrow corridors, modest candle placement, and carefully designed dormitories facilitated the flow of half-sleeping bodies. Bells and acoustics were arranged to optimize rhythm, signaling office and rest without unnecessary disturbance. Every element reinforced the patterns developed over centuries. The legacy of night extended to social and spiritual structures as well. Communities became self-regulating, sustained by habit and experience. Monks anticipated each other's needs. Subtle gestures conveyed empathy, caution, or correction. The culture of endurance, patience, and quiet adaptation became so ingrained that disruptions were rare and easily managed. Intellectually, the long-term effects of fragmented sleep and dim candlelight shaped focus and attention. Monks prioritized ritual, habit, and observation over novelty or impulsive thought. Reflection was narrow but deep, sustained by repetition. Knowledge, memory, and skill were encoded in practical action as much as in study. Emotionally, the legacy was similar. Peaks of excitement and despair were flattened. Emotional energy was channeled into rhythm and community rather than external drama. Fatigue, fasting, and dim light combined to produce calm, measured responses. Monks learned to navigate life with patience, subtlety, and quiet awareness. Even centuries later, when monasteries were dissolved, reformed, or repurposed, traces of this nocturnal shaping persisted. Manuscripts, architectural layouts, and oral traditions reflected centuries of practice. The rhythm of night had become embedded in culture, a testament to the quiet power of endurance, habit, and subtle adaptation. In this way, the night was not merely endured, it was transformed into a teacher, a guide, and an enduring framework for life. And the monks, moving steadily through half-light, fragmented rest, and gentle ritual, became living embodiments of that quiet, unremarkable, but profoundly effective legacy. Candlelight, though faint and modest, played a far greater role in monastic life than most outsiders could imagine. It was not just illumination, it was an instrument that shaped perception, behavior, and even social dynamics. In the interplay of light and shadow, monks learned subtleties that structured their nights and, by extension, their entire lives. Dim light encouraged careful movement. Rushing was difficult. Shadows obscured missteps. Every step required attention, reinforcing patience and deliberate action. The flicker of flame was enough to see immediate surroundings, but the periphery dissolved into shadow, limiting distraction and encouraging inward focus. Shadows also created a kind of equality. Faces, postures, and details became muted. In the half-light, distinctions faded. Novices and elders alike appeared similar, reinforcing communal cohesion. Candlelight dictated uniformity, subtly reminding monks that individual prominence mattered less than collective practice. Even mental patterns were shaped by light. Brighter illumination stimulates attention and energy. Dim light induces calm, slows thought, and reduces impulsivity. Monks' minds adjusted to the soft glow, enabling prolonged focus on repetitive tasks, copying manuscripts, chanting, observing ritual. Their cognition became steady, patient, and harmonized with environment.
Dormitories emphasized uniformity and modesty. Beds were arranged with precision. Personal items were minimal and placed carefully. Candles provided just enough light to navigate, but not enough to encourage lingering or unnecessary activity. This design reinforced the rhythm of wakefulness and sleep, subtly guiding behavior even in the absence of oversight. Chapel spaces were optimized for communal ritual. Seating, aisles, and candle placement facilitated synchronized movement and observation. The spatial arrangement reinforced hierarchy and attention, ensuring that each monk could participate fully while maintaining the rhythm dictated by bells and habit. Libraries and scriptoria were similarly structured. Workstations were arranged to maximize efficiency, with careful attention to light and accessibility. Manuscripts, desks, and writing implements were positioned for minimal disruption and smooth workflow. Monks internalized these arrangements, navigating the space intuitively in low light, further embedding habit and endurance. Even shared spaces such as refectories and kitchens were subtly organized to encourage cooperation, awareness, and coordination. Proximity, line of sight, and access to tools or resources guided social behavior without overt instruction. Spatial arrangement became a quiet instructor, shaping movement, rhythm, and attention. The architecture also reinforced temporal rhythm. Bells echoed differently in halls and cloisters, aiding orientation and anticipation. Candlelight interacted with corridors, rooms, and alcoves, signaling boundaries and highlighting areas of focus. The built environment worked in concert with ritual and habit, subtly structuring experience over decades.
Physical constraints and deliberate design contributed to self-discipline. Monks learned to anticipate obstacles, coordinate with peers, and navigate environments efficiently. Movement, attention, and pacing were embedded in the body through repetition, guided by the architecture itself. Over time, the monastery became both teacher and framework. Its design integrated ritual, rhythm, and spatial awareness into a coherent system that supported endurance, patience, and calm efficiency. The subtle architecture of discipline ensured that monks were constantly, quietly shaped by their environment, embedding the rhythms of monastic life into every movement, thought, and habit. In this way, discipline was not only imposed externally by rules or bells, but reinforced continuously by the physical space itself. The monastery's walls, corridors, and chambers became instruments of endurance, guiding generations of monks through a life of measured, persistent, and quietly structured existence. Chapter 27. The Shaping of Perception. Long-term exposure to the monastery's environment subtly altered the way monks perceived the world. Fragmented sleep, dim candlelight, repeated ritual, and the persistent toll of bells collectively shaped attention, awareness, and sensory experience. Over decades, this slow conditioning produced a mind attuned to rhythm, detail, and subtle cues, rather than sudden novelty or intense stimulation. Dim light influenced visual perception. Shadows softened edges, muted detail, and encouraged focus on immediate surroundings. Monks learned to notice slight flickers, shifts in wax, or the faint movement of a fellow practitioner. Peripheral distractions were naturally minimized. Attention became selective, slow, and deliberate, tuned to cues relevant to survival, ritual, and communal coordination. Sound, too, shaped perception. Bells, footsteps, and faint whispers became markers of time and social expectation. Over years, subtle differences, a change in cadence, an irregular step, a distant rustle, were noted instinctively. Hearing became a tool for timing, anticipation, and coordination. The auditory environment reinforced rhythm, guiding action without the need for verbal instruction. Temporal perception was equally affected. Fragmented sleep and cyclical ritual trained monks to measure time in increments rather than continuous flow. A night was experienced as sequences of wakefulness, brief rest, and repetitive tasks rather than as a single block. This cultivated patience and endurance, allowing attention to be focused on small segments of experience. Social perception adapted in parallel. Shared fatigue and quiet observation created a keen awareness of subtle cues, posture, gesture, proximity, or slight changes in movement. Missteps or disruptions were noted without commentary, guiding both individual adaptation and communal cohesion. Communication relied as much on perception as on speech. Even emotional perception was moderated. The monotony of night, combined with fatigue and ritual, dampened extremes of feeling. Joy, irritation, or surprise emerged gently rather than sharply. Emotional energy was conserved and directed toward necessary tasks, ritual attention, and social harmony. Over decades, these adjustments became automatic. Monks could navigate corridors, anticipate bells, adjust candlelight, and coordinate with peers without conscious thought. Perception was no longer reactive or scattered. It was integrated, habitual, and subtly attuned to the monastery's rhythms. In essence, the environment acted as a continuous trainer. Candlelight, sound, ritual, and fatigue sculpted not only behavior, but the very experience of seeing, hearing, feeling, and timing. Monks' minds were gradually shaped to operate efficiently within a constrained, predictable, and rhythmically structured world. This shaping of perception, though quiet and often imperceptible, was one of the monastery's most profound effects. It ensured that generations of monks could move through fragmented nights, low light,
fasting and ritual with remarkable calm, focus, and subtle coordination, an enduring testament to the quiet, cumulative power of environment, habit, and time.